Today I'm sharing 10 proven ways to make your BMW's engine last forever. These aren't complicated, you can start most of them today. They cost almost nothing compared to the thousands you'd spend on engine repairs. 1. Change it more than BMW says. Let's start with the most important one, oil changes. BMW's official recommended oil change interval is up to 15,000 miles or every 2 years on some models. On paper, that sounds great. Longer intervals mean lower ownership costs, right? In reality, that interval was designed for ideal driving conditions. Gentle highway cruising at a steady speed. Perfect weather. Zero traffic. That's not how most of us drive. If you do short trips, drive in stop-and-go traffic, enjoy spirited driving, or live somewhere with extreme temperatures, that oil is breaking down much faster. And here's what BMW specialists and forums across the internet agree on: shorten that interval. Way shorten it. The common enthusiast recommendation you'll see everywhere is every 5,000 miles or every 6 months, whichever comes first. But here's why this matters so much. As oil ages, two things happen. First, it gets filled with combustion byproducts, dirt, and microscopic metal particles. Second, it chemically breaks down, the additives deplete and the viscosity changes. When that happens, the oil can't properly lubricate the engine's tight tolerances. And BMW engines have very tight tolerances. This is especially critical for turbocharged BMWs. Turbos spin at tens of thousands of RPM and get red hot. They rely entirely on clean oil for lubrication and cooling. Starve a turbo of clean oil, and you're looking at a turbo replacement that costs thousands. Change your oil more frequently, and that turbo can easily last the life of the engine. And don't forget the oil filter. Every oil change needs a fresh filter. That's non-negotiable. The filter catches the contaminants so they don't circulate through your engine. But once it's full, it stops filtering effectively. One oil change is cheaper than an engine. A $60 to $100 oil change every 5,000 miles is a whole lot cheaper than a $5,000 to $10,000 engine replacement. It's the single best investment you can make in your BMW's longevity. 2. Stop driving before it's warm. Okay, this one's going to ruffle some feathers, because there are people out there who swear you should start the engine and drive immediately. They cite modern synthetic oils. They say idling is bad, and they're half right. Let me explain exactly how to do this correctly, because BMW owners get this wrong constantly. When your BMW has been sitting for hours, the engine oil drains down into the oil pan. And more importantly, the oil is cold. Cold oil is thicker than warm oil. Thicker oil doesn't flow as easily, and it doesn't lubricate as effectively, especially in the tight clearances that BMW engines are known for. So what should you do? Start the car and let it idle for about 20 to 30 seconds. You'll notice on most BMWs that the idle RPM is higher right after a cold start. That's the catalytic converter heating cycle. Once you hear the RPM drop back down to normal idle, usually around 600 to 800 revolutions per minute, that's your signal that it's okay to start driving. But here's the critical part that most people miss. After those 20 to 30 seconds, you can put the car in gear and drive away. But you need to drive gently. Keep the RPMs low, below 3,000 if possible. Avoid heavy throttle. Avoid high boost if you have a turbo. Just drive normally, easily, for the next 5 to 10 minutes. Why? Because your oil might be circulating, but it's not yet at full operating temperature, and neither is your engine block. When the engine is cold, metal components have actually contracted slightly. The clearances between the pistons and cylinder walls are smaller than when everything is hot and expanded. If you slam the throttle while everything is still cold, you're asking those tight components to handle full combustion pressure before the oil film is properly established. That's a recipe for accelerated wear. The same goes for your turbo if you have one. Turbochargers get extremely hot during hard driving. If you hammer the throttle before the oil is fully warm, you're circulating thick, cold oil through a turbo that's suddenly being asked to spin up. That's not good. Here's your rule of thumb. Don't go above 3,000 revolutions per minute until your coolant temperature gauge reaches its normal operating position. On most BMWs, that's right in the middle, around 95 degrees Celsius or about 203 degrees Fahrenheit. If your car doesn't have a coolant temp gauge, and many newer BMWs don't, give it a good 10 minutes of gentle driving before you have fun. And one more thing. If you've just finished a hard drive, don't shut the engine off immediately. Let it idle for a minute or two. This allows the turbo to cool down and prevents oil from coking inside the hot turbo housing. It's a small habit that adds years to your turbo's life. So here's the takeaway. 20 to 30 seconds of idle after cold start. Then drive gently until the engine is fully warm and enjoy your car. This isn't complicated. It makes a massive difference over 100,000 miles. 3. Rebuild the cooling system on a schedule. If there's one thing that kills BMW engines more than anything else, it's overheating. And overheating happens because the cooling system fails. Here's the problem. BMW uses a lot of plastic components in their cooling systems. Plastic expansion tanks, plastic thermostat housings, plastic water pump impellers, and plastic becomes brittle with heat cycles and age. After several years and tens of thousands of miles, that plastic is a ticking time bomb. When the cooling system fails, and it will fail, the consequences can be catastrophic. An overheated BMW engine can warp the cylinder head, blow the head gasket, or even crack the engine block. Those repairs cost thousands. Sometimes it's cheaper to replace the whole engine. But here's the good news. This is entirely preventable. You just need to be proactive. Here's the schedule that experienced BMW specialists recommend. Between 60,000 and 90,000 miles, you should do a full cooling system overhaul. That means replacing the water pump, thermostat, expansion tank, and all the plastic coolant pipes and hoses. Some older BMW models, like the E36, had components that would fail as early as 60,000 miles. Newer cars last a bit longer, but don't push it past 90,000 miles without doing this work. For the coolant itself, BMW recommends flushing and replacing it every 2 to 3 years. Coolant doesn't last forever. As it ages, it becomes acidic and loses its ability to protect against corrosion. Old coolant can actually start eating away at your cooling system components from the inside. Don't ignore the warning signs. If you ever see a coolant warning light, if your temperature gauge starts climbing higher than normal, if you notice coolant leaks under the car, or if you smell that sweet coolant smell from the engine bay, get it checked immediately. Here's a specific warning about the electric water pumps on many modern BMWs. They can fail without much warning. The car might just decide one day that it's not going to cool itself anymore. That's why preventive replacement is so important. The cost of a full cooling system overhaul is usually between $800 and $1,500 in parts if you do it yourself, or 2 to 3 times that at a shop. Compare that to a $5,000 to $8,000 engine replacement. It's not even a question. Prevent the failure before it happens. And while you're in there, check the radiator. Look for cracks, leaks, or signs of damage. The radiator should last through a couple of cooling system cycles, but don't ignore it forever. Radiators fail too. This is not glamorous maintenance. It doesn't make more power. It doesn't make the car sound better, but it's the difference between a BMW that runs for 200,000 miles and one that ends up as a parts car at 100,000 miles because the owner ignored the plastic cooling system. For clean or replace your VANOS solenoids early. VANOS. If you own a BMW with a 6-cylinder or 8-cylinder engine built after the mid-1990s, you have VANOS. It stands for Variable Nockenwellensteuerung, German for Variable Camshaft Timing, and it's brilliant when it works. But when it fails, it causes all sorts of problems. Here's what VANOS does. It adjusts the timing of the camshafts to optimize power, fuel economy, and emissions across the RPM range. At low RPM, it adjusts for smooth idle and good torque. At high RPM, it adjusts for maximum power. It's continuously variable, meaning it's always making small adjustments as you drive. The problem? VANOS systems rely on oil pressure to operate, and they have solenoids that control that oil flow. Over time, those solenoids can get clogged with sludge, dirt, or metal particles from normal engine wear. When the VANOS solenoids get dirty, you'll notice symptoms. The engine might idle rough. You might feel a loss of power, especially in the mid-range. Fuel economy can drop, and in some cases, you'll get check engine lights with VANOS-related codes. Now, here's the fix, and it's surprisingly simple compared to other BMW repairs. On most BMW engines, the VANOS solenoids are located on the front of the engine. You can remove them with basic hand tools. Once they're out, you can clean them with brake cleaner or a similar solvent. Spray through the little holes, shake them out, and repeat until the fluid runs clear. You should hear the internal valve moving freely when you shake the solenoid. After cleaning, reinstall them and reset any fault codes. In many cases, this completely restores VANOS function. But here's where preventive maintenance comes in. Don't wait for symptoms. If your BMW has over 60,000 or 70,000 miles and you've never touched the VANOS solenoids, add this to your to-do list. It's a 1-hour job that costs almost nothing. Or you can replace them outright with new units, which usually cost between $200 and $400 each depending on your engine. What causes VANOS problems in the first place? Dirty oil. The number one enemy of VANOS is extended oil change intervals. Remember way number 1? It applies directly here. When you let oil go too long, it accumulates contaminants that then flow through the VANOS system and gum up the solenoid. Shorten your oil change interval, and your VANOS system stays cleaner. A quick note about the VANOS bolts. Some BMW engines, particularly certain N52 and N54 engines, had a recall issue where VANOS housing bolts could come loose. Check if your engine is affected. If it is, those bolts should be replaced with updated versions before they back out and cause serious problems. So here's your fourth way. Every 50,000 to 60,000 miles, pull your VANOS solenoids, clean them thoroughly, and reinstall. If they're already causing problems, replace them. And always use clean oil to keep them happy. 5. Replace the DISA valve before it explodes. This one is specific to BMWs with the M54 engine, but the principle applies across many BMW models. The DISA valve, sometimes called the intake air adjustment unit, controls the path of air in the intake manifold. It switches between shorter and longer intake runners to optimize torque across the RPM range. Here's the scary part. The DISA valve has a plastic flap inside. That flap is attached to a metal pin. Over time, the plastic becomes brittle. The pin can work itself loose, and when that happens, the pin can fall out of the valve, and then it gets sucked directly into the engine. Yes, you heard that right. A metal pin can get ingested through the intake manifold and into the combustion chamber. At that point, the engine is probably destroyed. Piston damage, cylinder wall scoring, bent valves. It's catastrophic. And here's the worst part. The DISA valve doesn't usually give much warning before it fails. You might hear a rattling noise from the intake manifold area. You might notice a rough idle or hesitation at low RPM. But sometimes, it just lets go without warning. So what's the solution? Replace the DISA valve proactively. On the M54 engine, which was used in countless BMW 3 Series, 5 Series, X3, and Z4 models from the early 2000s, the DISA valve should be considered a maintenance item. A new OEM DISA valve costs around $250 to $400 depending on where you buy it. Aftermarket rebuild kits are also available that replace the plastic internal components with stronger materials, but the safest approach is to replace the entire unit. Installation is straightforward. On most engines, the DISA valve is mounted to the side of the intake manifold with a few bolts. Remove the old one, install the new one with a fresh gasket, and you're done. It's a 30-minute job for a beginner. If your engine uses a different variable intake system, and many BMW engines do, research the specific failure modes for your car. The principle is the same. Understand what plastic or rubber components are inside your intake system that could fail and destroy your engine. Replace them before they fail. Don't ignore a rattling noise from the intake side of your engine. Don't ignore rough idle or hesitation. These could be early warning signs that your DISA valve is failing. And if you have an M54 engine and you don't know when the DISA valve was last replaced, do it now. It's cheap insurance against catastrophic engine failure. 6. Vent to survive, PCV to CCV system. Let's talk about the most overlooked piece of plastic on your BMW, the crankcase ventilation system. BMW calls it the CCV or the oil separator. Some people just call it the PCV valve. No matter the name, if it fails, your engine dies a slow, messy death of sludge and seal failure. Over time, the rubber diaphragms inside the CCV system harden, and the little internal passages get completely clogged with a mayonnaise-like sludge made of oil vapor and condensation. This is especially brutal on the older M54 engines from the E46 and E39 years. Here is what happens when this fails. A clogged CCV blocks the crankcase pressure from escaping. Instead of pulling vacuum, the pressure builds up. That pressure starts pushing back, forcing oil out of every possible exit. You will blow your valve cover gasket, your oil pan gasket, and your rear main seal. Replacing those gaskets is a multi-$1,000 job involving dropping the subframe or pulling the transmission. How do you prevent this? On many older inline-six BMWs, you should plan to replace the entire CCV system roughly every 60,000 to 80,000 miles. Do not just replace the little filter. Replace the entire hose assembly. The hoses become hard as glass, and as soon as you touch them for a repair, they will shatter. Here are the warning signs. A whistling or howling sound coming from the engine after startup, a thick yellow milky residue under your oil cap, or burning massive amounts of oil are signs of CCV failure. Do not ignore the honking noise. A failed CCV can freeze up in cold weather and create so much suction that it collapses your intake hoses or vacuums all the oil out of your pan instantly. If you own a later model BMW with the N55 or B58 engine, your flow separator is usually integrated into the valve cover. You cannot service it separately. If it fails, you need the whole valve cover assembly. It is expensive, but it is cheaper than a mechanic's lien. Inspect your oil filler cap today. Is there sludge? Are you using a quart of oil every 1,000 miles without seeing a puddle on the ground? The engine is eating its own vapor, and that vapor is clogging your intake valves and destroying your emission systems. Replace the CCV now. 7. Clean your injectors and walnut blast. If you own a turbocharged BMW with a N54, N55, or the newer B58 engine, your engine has a fatal design flaw that you must manage. They use direct injection. In a direct injection engine, the fuel is sprayed directly into the cylinder. In an old port injection car, the fuel washed over the intake valves and kept them clean. In your BMW, that cleaning effect is gone. Instead, crankcase gases from your PCV system dump oil vapor directly onto the back of your intake valve. The heat of the turbo bakes that oil into solid black carbon. It looks like crunchy black charcoal stuck to your valves. This buildup destroys airflow and creates hot spot. Here is the scary part. BMW specialists have proven that you can lose up to 40 horsepower just from carbon buildup on the valve. Your car will idle rough, hesitate when you try to accelerate, and kill your fuel economy. How do you fix it? The cheap fuel additives do not work. You need something called a walnut blast. This is the gold standard procedure where mechanics blast crushed walnut shells through your intake port. The shells are hard enough to chip away the carbon but soft enough that they won't scratch your aluminum cylinder head. When should you do it? BMW enthusiasts recommend scheduling a walnut blast roughly every 30,000 to 50,000 miles. Some cars get so dirty they need it at 25,000 miles if they do a lot of short trips. It costs a few $100s at an independent shop or over $1,000 at the dealer. If you have an older port injection BMW like the M52 or M54 engines, you dodge the direct injection carbon bullet. However, you still need to think about your fuel injectors. Gas quality matters. If you always buy cheap gas, the detergents are weaker, and the tiny nozzles of your BMW injectors get sticky. This leads to lean misfires, rough start, and dead catalytic converters. Use top-tier rated gasoline as often as possible. It contains the highest level of detergent additives approved by BMW to keep your fuel system clean. If you are over 100,000 miles and you have never touched the fueling system, consider sending your injectors out for ultrasonic cleaning. For high mileage owners, a new set of fuel injectors and a fresh fuel filter often makes the car feel 10 years younger. 8. Replace the gaskets before they leave you stranded. Every long-lasting BMW eventually leaks oil. It is a fact of life. The gaskets become brittle from the extreme heat cycle. However, the difference between a high-mileage hero and a junkyard donor is that the hero owner replaces the gaskets before the oil ruins something else. There are 3 notorious gasket leak points on nearly every BMW built in the last 25 years. The valve cover gasket, the oil filter housing gasket, and the oil pan gasket. Let us break down why these are so important. First, the valve cover gasket. When this fails, it is usually the outermost seal. It drips oil down onto the side of the hot exhaust manifold. You will smell burning oil in the cabin at a stoplight. If you ignore it, the oil level drops critically low. Worse, if the oil leaks into the spark plug wells, your ignition coils will short out, leaving you with a violent misfire and a tow bill. Second, the oil filter housing gasket. This is the most dangerous gasket on your BMW. It is sandwiched between the engine block and the oil filter. When it starts to seep, hot oil drips directly onto the serpentine belt. The belt eats the oil and swells up. The swollen belt slips off the pulleys and gets sucked through the front crankshaft seal into the engine. That destroys the timing chain, jumps timing, and bends every valve in the head. It is a catastrophic engine failure from a $20 gasket. If you see a tiny drop of oil on your driveway or oil residue on the front of the engine block, do not ignore it. If the belt snaps, the engine is usually dead. Replace the belt and the gasket at the same time. Third, the oil pan gasket. This is less urgent than the other two, but it makes a huge mess. On all-wheel drive BMWs, changing this gasket requires dropping the front subframe, an 8-hour job. That means most owners skip it. They let the leak get worse. Eventually, the engine runs low on oil, spins a rod bearing, and seizes up. Check your driveway every morning. A few drops today is a warning. Ignore it, and the leak becomes a gushing failure on the highway. Do not just add oil. Fix the gasket. These rubber seals are rated for about 60,000 to 80,000 miles. If you are close to that number, put a gasket kit on your shopping list. 9. Service the driveline and mount. Many people think an engine lasts forever just on oil changes. That is wrong. The engine will spin beautifully, but the rubber and metal connecting it to the wheels will crumble. You need to maintain the driveline. Let us start with the guebua, pronounced J-E-bo. This is a rubber donut that connects your transmission to your drive shaft. It absorbs the shock of shifting gears. However, rubber rots. Over time, you will see large dry cracks in the rubber. If those cracks go all the way through, the drive shaft loses connection to the trans. When that happens, the drive shaft falls down, smashes into the road at 70 miles per hour, and pole vaults the rear of your car into the air. It is terrifying. Inspect your guebua every 50,000 miles. If you see any cracking, replace it immediately with a heavy-duty version. While you are under there, replace the center support bearing. The CSB holds the middle of the driveshaft up. If that bearing collapses, the driveshaft bounces off the floor of the chassis, causing a loud drone noise in the cabin. Next, the engine mounts. Your engine mounts are filled with rubber and sometimes hydraulic fluid. Over a decade of heat, they sag. The engine drops by an inch. That drop misaligns the radiator fan, causing it to hit the shroud or breaks the exhaust flex pipes. You will feel excessive vibration in the steering wheel at idle. That vibration shakes the wiring looms, loosens the bolts, and fatigues the metal. Replace the mounts at 80,000 to 100,000 miles. Many owners chase at squeaky belt for months, replacing the alternator and pulling their hair out. The issue is actually a collapsed engine mount tilting the engine and putting tension on the serpentine belt. If you replace the belt, tensioner, and pulleys but skip the engine mounts, the vibration will just break the new belt. Replace the mounts, the belt, the guebwa, and the CSB at the same time. A well-maintained driveline makes a BMW feel tight and expensive. Worn driveline parts make a BMW feel like a cheap rattle trap. Do not ignore the rubber underneath the car. 10. The everything else catch-up. You have reached the final stage. You have done the oil changes early. You have warmed it up properly. You have replaced the cooling system, the gasket, and the suspension. You are at 200,000 miles, and you want to hit 300,000. This is where you have to look at the things that usually kill a high-mileage BMW: the battery, the electrical system, and the intake. Modern BMWs are rolling computers. If the electrical system glitches, the transmission refuses to shift, the ECU pulls timing, and the car goes into limp mode to protect itself. The first line of defense is the battery. BMW uses a GM battery. When your battery starts to fail after 3 to 5 years, the voltage fluctuates. Low voltage causes every module in the car to act crazy. False transmission malfunction warnings and ABS failure warning. The scariest part is that if you just buy a battery from the store and drop it in without telling the computer, you will kill the new battery in 6 months. You must register the battery with the car's computer so it knows a new one is installed and adjusts the charging rate. Without registration, the alternator overcharges and destroys the battery. Second, stop buying cheap parts. When your water pump fails, do not buy the $50 no-name pump. In the BMW world, you get what you pay for. Stick to OEM brands like genuine BMW, Moll, Rain, or Lemfeder. The cheap parts often fail within 10,000 miles, and you have to do the labor twice. Paying for quality once is cheaper than paying for repairs constantly. Third, listen to the car. If your BMW develops a tapping noise that speeds up with RPM, that is not normal. That could be the hydraulic lifters collapsing, or worse, it could be the rod knock, which means the engine is already dead. Driving it hard will throw a rod through the block. Fourth, find a good scan tool. You cannot maintain a modern BMW with guesswork. Buy a diagnostic tool that reads BMW-specific fault codes for the engine, transmission, airbags, and ABS. If a check engine light comes on, do not just clear it. Read the code. It might be a $10 oxygen sensor, or it might be a failing catalytic converter. Knowledge is power. Finally, be patient. Old BMWs break. They leak. The window regulators fail. However, if you methodically follow these 10 rules, the engine itself will stay healthy. The chassis might creak, the leather might crack, but the heart of the car will keep beating. It is not about being rich. It is about being systematic. Stick to the maintenance schedule, fix the leaks when they start, and you will be the one telling people, yeah, it just hit 300,000 miles. It runs like new. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed these 10 proven ways to make your BMW's engine last forever. If you already follow these steps, drop a comment and tell me your mileage.